Hello, welcome to Prisca Theologia. Today we're going to be learning about the mysteries of Moses within. We're going to understand this from an allegorical perspective and take the story of Moses, and we're going to understand it from an astrological, biochemical, syncretic point of view. We've been told that, Moses was the person that helped the Israelites escape from the slavery and bondage of Egypt, and that he was given the 10 Commandments and that he was a literal historical person. I beg to differ. Be learning from some of the works of George W. Carey, God, Man, Word Made Flesh, and understand this from a biochemical perspective of Moses being an archetype within yourself. As you can see, Moses raised the serpents in the wilderness. Moses raised the serpents on the staff. The staff is a biochemical symbol of the spinal column inside of the body. The energy is trapped in the lower chakras or the root chakra. Our appetites, our lustfulness, our animal nature. And man tends to become enslaved or to be tempted by this energy, and we end up slaving away to fulfill the desires of the pharaoh. Now, George W. Carey, in his book, God, Man, Word Made Flesh, he explains here that the plagues of Egypt, these same locusts, sex, appetite, gluttony, or devourers are and always have been the plagues, sickness and disease in all people in all ages. And now when evildoers wax worse and worse, a majority of human beings are deliberately and with malice aforethought committing suicide through eating and drinking for pleasure and indulging in sexual excesses on every plane and everywhere known to carnal perverts. Officers of the law tell us that the licentiousness has certainly reached its limit. The handwriting on the wall appears. In proof of this, allow us to quote the following by the great poet Tagore, printed in the August first issue of the Los Angeles Examiner. I came from Asia expecting to find Europe a vale of tears, a desert of misery and grief, with 10 million dead, stricken suddenly by shell or bullet from the roster of the earth, snatched from their firesides, and their babies and the women whom they loved. What should one visualize but a Europe draped in black, a Europe where the innocent laughter of a tiny child would seem a gross incongruity? Yes, Europe weeps not. She has cast off her black and is wearing her brightest colors, her most splendid plums. Her men are already forgetting their slaughtered brothers in the insentient effort to profit from the abnormal financial conditions prevailing because of the war. Her women are her women. They are snatching flowers, bright red poppies from the graves of their fallen husbands and sons to wear them in their hair. So we have the story of Moses, and we do understand that Moses, on an archetypal level, is symbolizes willpower and the power of the spirit, the power within ourselves that allows us to become liberated from the bondage of the pharaoh, who is the lower ego or the lower chakras of the base of the spine. And Moses means drawn from water. Moses means drawn from water. See that Moses means drawn from water, which our inner Moses is drawn from the waters of the celestial realms and put into safety here in the womb, where it grows and conquers over the trials of life. And Moses represents the sun in Aries. We know that Moses blows the ram horn and says to stop worshiping the golden calf. This is symbolized by the astrological age of Taurus ending and the age of Aries coming about. We go from Taurus, Aries to Pisces to now we're in Aquarius. So Moses is the prophet or planet Mars in Aries. Moses is also the sun because the sun is the prime character and takes on the planet and the rulership of the current age. So we have Moses in the age of Aries. Aries is a symbol of fire and willpower. Mars rules the seas, maritime, and Moses parts the waters. So let's dive deep into the symbolism of what exactly this means. So Mars rules Aries, so Moses takes on the personality type of that planet. Moses is the inner being, or the inner archetype, that helps liberate our soul from the bondage of desire. Now, the bondage of desire is represented by the pharaoh, and the pharaoh has the Israelites being slaves. Moses being the hero, or the person drawn from water, who is wrapped up in a little cloth and put into the water. Now that water, that river that he's placed in, is the spinal column. The spinal column goes from the top of the brain to the bottom of the coccyx, and it has a cerebral spinal fluid, which is symbolized in occult anatomy as the Jordan River. So when Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River, it's talking about the seed, or the kundalini energy, that goes into the spinal column and is baptized in the water. In the same way, Moses means drawn from water. He's taken from water and placed down into the stream of water, where the Pharaoh's wife finds him and instructs him in the way of the Egyptians. So Moses grows up as an Egyptian initiate. Remember, it's allegory. And he's able to lead the Israelites out of bondage. The Israelites are the energy that descends from the top of the head down to the genital region. The energy becomes static and wild, and most mankind is enslaved to his animal passions, and they're enslaving through the vices of being in Egypt. So Egypt always represents the lower part of man's nature, which are below the scales of Libra. Now, if we take a look at this slide here, you can see that scales of Libra rule the kidneys. Aries, Moses, is the ram. Now we have Moses, which is the lamb. Aries, Mars, willpower, which overcomes the bondage of being in Egypt, which are the lower signs below the kidneys. So the Scorpio, the Sagittarius, Capricorn, these animals symbolize the animalistic nature that man overcomes. So you see Moses drawn from water. Moses means drawn from water. The seed is drawn from the waters of the cerebral spinal fluid and is helping to nourish the nervous system. And when Moses rises back up into the brain, or the pineal gland, the mind is reactivated to its supernal nature and is able to conquer its lower appetites. So when we're in bondage and enslaved in Egypt, that means we're being ruled by our lower ego and are in bondage. We're hankering for senses. We're capable of harming others. We're capable of harming ourselves. And when Moses, or willpower, liberates us from these lower, we part the Red Sea. The Israelites are taken out of bondage, and we part the Red Sea, and we're able to go to the promised land flowing of milk and honey. Now, the symbol of milk and honey is because the spinal cord ends into the ventricle of the brain, where the pineal gland and pituitary gland sit. Now, each gland has a different fluid in it. One of the fluid is white and the other one yellow, being milk and honey. And these two glands are what form the seed in the solar plexus. This seed is in the first story called Moses. And then the seed becomes Joshua. And then the seed becomes Jesus. Now, Jesus, the fish, or son of Nun, or Joshua means son of the fish, because this oil smells like fish, and it's inside of the spinal column. And when we overcome our lower nature and the lower appetites and the lower sensations of the lower nature, then this seed is saved and rises up back into the brain. Now, this is where, the ancients were essentially practicing semen retention and understanding, what we call today as no fap, or all of the people that are nowadays trying to overcome pornography or masturbation or illicit sex. They essentially are becoming Christified. They're becoming Moseses. They're activating their inner willpower to overcome the animal nature. Now, back then, this was seen as a religious, spiritual thing that takes place in our life when we become Christified. and our body's saved from the lower nature. So the seed, or Moses, is raised through willpower and living in accordance with the laws of the Creator. So when we follow, because Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and sees the burning bush, or this is before he goes to Mount Sinai. He's in the wilderness and is contacted by the burning bush. The burning bush is the baptism of fire. When we go through different stages of consciousness, we have earth, water, air, and fire. So when Moses is speaking to the burning bush, he's going through a baptism of fire, a renewal of his mind. The burning bush is none other than the cranium. It's the brain itself. The brain looks like a burning bush. The cerebrum is the higher faculty in man and woman. Mount Sinai, being heaved up place, is esoterically speaking about the brain. So when he receives the knowledge of the 10 Commandments, it's when he's gone up to Mount Sinai, or the brain, that Kundalini, or Moses energy, has rise. It has fallen, gets placed in the water, is then taken out of the water, raised up to liberate the Israelites from bondage in the lower chakras. The energy is then liberated and is allowed to flow up the spine, vertebrae by vertebrae, until it reaches the promised land. And this is where God speaks to Moses in the brain. When the seed is rising to the top of the spine, enters the third ventricle of the brain, and illumination takes place. So Moses is Mars, the sun in Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. But on a biochemical level, this force takes place within ourselves as we understand the truth of our being. When we overcome our lower nature, our impulses, and our bad habits, and we start to take control using our higher faculties that we are endowed with as humans, and we start to overcome our impulses and our automatic behaviors, this energy is kept in and reserved and begins to rise. Now, it parts the Red Sea when the left brain of logical thought, opens the gate to the right hemisphere where we cross the Red Sea. The crossing the Red Sea representing activating the spiritual consciousness. Remember, when he crossed the Red Sea, that water came and drowned the pharaohs and all the people that were chasing them, because they symbolize the lower nature of man that tries to chase us when we're striving. Moses puts an end to that through willpower of the spirit. Spirit and willpower symbolized by the fifth element, which allows us to conquer the lower elements. When the sacred oil returns after the crossing or the crucifixion, it enters the cerebellum Golgotha, the place of the skull. The fluid of the Christ is refined 1,000-fold, or Moses receives the 10 Commandments. So here's the oil that travels. The spinal column is the Jordan River. The spinal column is where Moses, being drawn from water, is drawn from. Solar plexus is where the seed is born. And then it travels upward into the brain, activating our spiritual powers, which we've lost due to the fact that we are enslaved in Egypt. Egypt represents anything below the kidneys. So when we're talking about gluttony, appetite, sex, greed, avarice, anger, all the things that keep us bondage to the material realm. When we start activating our heart chakra, we develop spiritual willpower. The spiritual willpower is known as Moses, and Moses liberates the Israelites, or the archetypes that are formed in the lower chakras, because the sexual fluids that descend into the lower chakras come from the cerebrum, which produce the hormones and fluids that help the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid. That cerebral spinal fluid is enriched with this seed, or Moses, that is born in the solar plexus. And if we keep it there, we retain and we are calm, pleasant, positive, and doing the right thing, right action, right feeling, and right thinking. This seed or germ is lifted up into the brain, and then we are shown the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is in the brain. And in the next videos, we're going to be showing exactly how the Bible is an anatomy book for the biochemistry of the body, spiritual anatomy book, as well as an astrology book. Manly P. Hall says that the Bible is layered, or any sacred text is layered with 7 different layers, 7 different seals, and each seal is a different interpretation. So here we have Moses being Aries, Mars in the age of Aries, and then we have Moses being the seed in the body that produces a biochemical change. These are 2 aspects of the same coin because this universe in nature is holographic. The spirit communicates to us through these images, these stories, and these pictures in which divine seers and prophets wrote down and able to crystallize and give form to the incomprehensible. So, Egypt represents the lower part of man's nature, below the scales of Libra. This is the 3 chakras that are instinctual and drive security, procreation, eating, and surviving. When we are trapped in the lower chakras, we are the slaves of Egypt under rule of the pharaoh or the desires of the flesh. We liberate this energy, gaining conscious control over the lower impulses and start living in alignment with the laws of the inner being. Now, the inner being is the I am, the great I am that Moses spoke to in the burning bush. The burning bush is the brain when it's been touched by the serpentine fire, the kundalini, or the Holy Spirit, and we're able to commune with our higher divine guardian angel or our higher divine being. In a sense, it's the oversoul. We have the oversoul, the super soul, and we have our individual souls. Our individual souls communicates with the oversoul is connected to the super soul. This is why we have these dualities in the scriptures. We have Moses and we have Jehovah. We have the burning bush, I am, talking to Moses. We have Moses liberating the Israelites from bondage in Egypt, which is the lower part of the spine. So when we raise our energy up to the brain through righteous living, the light appears as a burning bush. The burning bush is the brain illuminated. The higher mind is Moses, who is the willpower, receives the divine commandments from the inner being after liberation from Egypt or the lower mind. So that's mysteries of Moses as the solar being within. We're going to go into a little bit more depth about the mysteries of Moses and understand it from a perspective of initiation. You just find it. Sorry about that. Oh, really, really sorry about that, guys. There we go. So Moses, the inner Moses, our spiritual willpower, is the only thing that can free the Israelites from bondage. So an Israelite is one inwardly who has decided to transmute the lower nature. So when one becomes an Israelite, a lot of people think that Israelites are a specific race or people that live on the earth historically. But esoterically speaking, the Bible is written in code and allegory. So each word, for example, Jews are the higher divine thoughts. Israelites are someone who's decided to say, okay, I'm done with this impulsive nature. I am going to start using my spiritual willpower to overcome some of these tendencies and to follow my inner will or the inner I am, which is the same. And it's only one I am. That one I am creates miniature little individual entities. And we have to follow that consciousness within. So our inner Israelite are the energy that's bound to the lower chakras by the pharaoh of Egypt. Remember, the pharaoh represents our lower ego and our carnal desires. While we're in bondage, we have feelings of lust, fear, shame, pride. We hunger for material goods. We hunger for approval. We want to be satisfied. But the fleeting of these senses and tyranny of the senses can never be quenched. The only way to find bliss within is to conquering these desires through Moses. And Moses, our spiritual willpower that helps us rise from these lower centers as we make our journey to the promised land. Remember, the promised land is in the brain, flowing with milk and honey. The pineal and pituitary gland harmonially balanced. Harmony, meaning harmony of the sun and moon, the left and right hemisphere of the brain. The body is now in an equilibrated state, and we reach the promised land, which is the kingdom of heaven. And if you watch Santo Spinacci's presentations, he'll tell you that heaven and hell are a state of consciousness before they're an actual place. So we have to enter the promised land within ourselves here and now if we want to expect to go to a better realm after here. So our spiritual willpower helps us raise from these lower centers as we make our journey to the promised land. This represents the Christic Kundalini energy that's able to rise from the lower chakras and reach the land flowing with milk and honey, which is the higher mind or the cerebrum. Now we know when we say the cerebrum, we're talking about the ram, Aries, the ram of God. The cerebrum, if seen from a particular point of view, you can search up cerebrum on Google Images and you will see the lamb. It looks like a fluffy lamb. And there's actually like a literal lamb. Our brain looks like a lamb face. It's actually quite mystical to know that Aries rules the cerebrum. The cerebrum looks like a sheep with wool and also resembles a lamb. And we know that Moses is always shown with ram's horns coming out because he symbolizes Aries. And Aries symbolizes willpower or the spiritual force of fire. So how do we do this? Well, we have to wander through our own personal wilderness. Remember when he goes through the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus is in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. It's about initiation and the fact that you have to conquer your lower self through various initiatory prohibitions. For example, we may go through periods of fasting, prayer, meditation, not overeating, refraining from spilling the sexual fluid, or what they would term nowadays the no-fap community, or the people that are trying to fight their lower instinctual nature, and turn it into something better. So when you're in your personal wilderness, you're also refraining from drugs, alcohol. You're finding peace within rather than without, and you're reserving the sexual energy. This is initiation. This is how you activate the power of Moses within. Now, once the activation occurs, this story of Moses plays out in your psyche and your life as you conquer and liberate your soul essence, the Israelites, from the bottom chakras. When they rise and that liberated energy rises into the brain and you experience divine communion and receive the 10 commandments, which are related to the 10 initiations. So that when Moses commands the rock to bring forth water, not by force, but by spiritual will, allowing water to come forth and quench our thirst, we move from the earth stage of consciousness to the water stage of consciousness. In the Greek esoteric system, there's 4 states of consciousness: earth, water, air, and fire. Now, when we're in the earth, we are entombed in matter, we're unconscious, and we're habitual. When we're baptized by water, or John baptizes Jesus in water, he says, I baptize you with water, but the one who comes after me baptizes with fire. Well, because when we're baptized by water, we experience the truth of our true being. And once we experience that truth, it creates a yearning for more truth, for more God. And we reach the higher level of consciousness of air, where we meet Jesus in the clouds, or where Moses meets Jehovah in the clouds of Mount Sinai. It's the air level of consciousness when we put an end to the bickering thoughts, the polarity, the dualistic thinking, and we come to a state of equilibrium. This equilibrium, this peaceful state of mind, allows room for the baptism of fire, or the Christic baptism of fire, which Moses and Jesus both go through as an example. So this allows us to move from earth consciousness, which is reactive, robotic consciousness, to the level of water, which is silence and peace. The parting of the Red Sea of the lower controlled emotions allows us to enter the right hemisphere of the brain, where all the creative, receptive thoughts are, rather than the left antagonistical, logical thinking is. So we need willpower. So Moses' staff has serpents entwined on it. So as we can see, Moses is instructing them how to raise the brazen serpent. This brazen serpent is Moses being an initiate, talking about raising the Kundalini. Now, the rising of the Kundalini is a very laborious task. Each vertebrae it rises is only an effect of huge ordeals and sacrifice that we perform. So when we choose to become real loving creatures, and we're not just running around spilling our seed, getting drunk, clinging to material goods, becoming ambitious, we enter a state calm of mind, our energy is reserved, and that spiritual willpower is then ascends up the spinal column, that heat, that kinetic magnetic energy that we feel. Moses as the staff, and that's why Moses has those serpents entwined, showing the masterful control of the energy in our bodies. We need willpower, we need Moses, and Moses is willpower. The ram Aries, the cerebrum, is the higher mind, which in anatomy is shaped just like a lamb with fleece and wool. Now, we talked about how astrologically Moses is the ram or Aries, telling us to stop worshiping the bull Taurus. Now, it means that we're moving from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries. But this also means that in the age of Taurus, we were very materialistic. What does Taurus rule? The senses, materialistic, lust. These are the negative aspects of Taurus. So whenever the Bible is talking about, he blew the ram's horn and says to stop worshiping the golden calf, it's talking about we are transcending our nature that just wants to worship material idols, material necessities, material pleasures. And we're moving to the more spiritual sign of Aries, which is fire. So we're moving from earth to cardinal fire. And by doing this, we're creating a spiritual transition in consciousness, but it still has to take place individually within ourselves here and now. So these are some of the things that Moses, the story of Moses, represents. And we know that Moses represents the initiate on the journey to rise the Kundalini up into the brain, where the spiritual faculties are then reactivated. And this is how we carry out the divine plan. So I wanted to read some from George W. Carey here. So he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John, 1st chapter. W-O-R-D, this combination of letters does not mean, in its first and original sense, voice, sound, or speech. Physiologically speaking, it means a precious substance. Therefore, as mankind must be placed on their feet physically before the same condition can exist mentally and spiritually, we must get down to the fundamentals and give the physiological meaning of word. The Hebrew alphabet consists of 22 letters, each letter having a concrete meaning. In the formation of Hebrew characters, letters were chosen, which when combined identify plainly every phase of that idea which they wish to express. So if we take the word W-O-R-D, and dissect it and understand the meaning of each letter. So we know that the W, there's no letter of W in the Hebrew alphabet. So what W was double V, W. Its meaning is hook. The arms and legs are the hooks of the body. VV or double V is the 18th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the characters which they used to express that letter were written as thus, T-Z-A-D-D-I. Almost unpronounceable. This letter is also, as we write it, in the 18th in our alphabet. Its number has a great significance. As the 9th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Teth, represents the equilibrium of the father and mother, the perfect balance of male and female, or positive and negative forces, as manifested in the perfected or completed human being. So the word, in and of itself, the letter W represents the earthly or Adam man, the material body, and the lower mind. The letter O of the alphabet in Hebrew has somewhat the same meaning, but in a deeper sense alludes to the material building, an operation in the visible and material world, the materialization of God, the Holy Spirit, the entrance of the Holy Spirit into the visible world. The Tarot tells us, since God, one, is individual or undivided and undifferentiated, to manifest in the material plane, God or that must divide, must become two halves of the circle, must manifest as positive and negative, male and female, electricity and magnetism. From this, we deduce the expression dual power or dual operation. In astronomy, it's represented by the sign of Capricorn. These dual forces are activating within us, become the goat, which bears away the sins of the world. So what we're explaining here is the fact that the word is made flesh, and this word, or the truth from the logos, descends into the human body as a psychophysical seed, which is deposited in the solar plexus, which, if not interfered with, goes down into the sexual organs and rises back up into the brain and reactivates our spiritual senses. But because we are in bondage to the pharaoh of Egypt, Moses is unable to free the Israelites or the energy from the lower chakras, and they slave for the pharaoh. Now, when Moses does liberate the energy, they're free. They go into the wilderness for the initiation training to help overcome the lower nature. And they are then brought to the crossing of the Red Sea. Now, Alvin Boyd Kuhn has a beautiful book called The Red Sea is Your Blood. Now, these stories are not just astrological and biochemical, they're also anagogical. So on the third level, it's talking about Moses is the spirit incarnating into flesh. And that crossing the Red Sea is none other than the soul's voyage of experience in the human body. The human body has blood. The red blood is esoterically the Red Sea that we all have to cross throughout our lives in order to make it to the promised land, which is where we reactivate the cerebrum, which is the higher mind, which gives us the ability to overcome the negative serpents that the pharaoh has. Remember, there was a battle of serpents, but Moses' serpent won, because that divine kundalini, when raised on the staff appropriately, puts an end to all of the negative serpents of senses and all the stings of material desire and the material realm. We could become protected by this through the spiritual willpower of Moses and understanding the story on an esoteric, anagogical, as well as biochemical level. So this is exactly how Moses liberates the Israelites from the bondage of the pharaoh in Egypt. That's all about alchemy. That's all about astrology. It's all about astral psychology and understanding how the mind works. Now, one part of our mind is the Moses. Another part is the king, the pharaoh. The pharaoh is trying to put an end to the firstborn, because the firstborn is the seed that's born in the manger or Bethlehem, whereas Moses, which is drawn from water. And the pharaoh, which is our lower appetites or the lower ego, the automatic nature, wants to destroy that seed before it has time to rise and free the Israelites from bondage in Egypt and liberate them to the promised land, flowing with milk and honey. Now, the brain flows with milk and honey, with DMT and serotonin. And these two chemicals are produced by the pineal and pituitary gland, give spiritual sight, spiritual vision, and overcome all of the impurities of the blood. So we can see the similar stories of Jesus and Moses, as Moses was also trying to be killed by the pharaoh, and Jesus was trying to be killed by Herod. Jesus turned the water into wine. Moses turned the waters of the pharaoh's kingdom into blood. It's talking about the transmutation process within the body as our human body turns oxygen into blood, turns water, hydrogen, and oxygen into the red blood. And the Red Sea is our human body, in which the soul, Moses, or the son, has to incarnate into and experience the circumstances of the sine wave, because our life is all based on the sine wave. And this sine wave allows us to understand our purpose in life, as long as we understand the story appropriately. Well, this will be an intro video to the mysteries of Moses. Looking forward to helping you understand more in the next video. Thank you.